Welcome back to Dark Untold. They say cemeteries are places of peace. But what if I told you some graves don't stay silent? What if I told you that after hearing these stories, you'll never walk past a tombstone the same way again? Tonight, we uncover 8 new most disturbing cemetery horror stories, from faceless figures that watch the living, to coffins that scream in the night, to whispers that know your deepest secrets. These are not just legends. People claim they happened. And by the time we're done, you might start to wonder if the dead are closer than you think. Turn off the lights, put on your headphones, and whatever you do, don't follow the voices. The first time I saw it, I knew I should run. My name is Clara Hayes. I'm 27, and I investigate legends of the supernatural for a small online Series 1 run. I've chased everything from haunted houses to abandoned asylums, but nothing prepared me for Hollow Grove Cemetery and the lantern that haunted it. I had driven through the rolling hills just as twilight bled into night. The sky bruised purple and black, fog thickening across the low fields. The locals had warned me not in vague whispers, but in urgent, trembling tones, never to follow the lantern's light, that it would lead you somewhere you could never return from. Naturally, I ignored it. The cemetery's gate creaked in the wind as I pushed through, and the cold air struck me like a blade. It smelled faintly of wet soil and decaying leaves, with a metallic tang that made my stomach turn. I held my camera in one hand, notebook in the other, and tried to steady myself. Fog clung to my boots and rose around my legs, thick and unyielding. Tombstones leaned at strange angles, some cracked and weathered, others slick with moss. It was silent, oppressive, as though the world itself had stopped to watch me. That's when I saw it, a flicker of light between the gravestones, moving slowly, almost deliberately. A small lantern, pale and flickering, swaying like it was carried by a breeze too slight to feel. My heart thumped, each beat echoing against the silence. I remembered the stories. A lantern that lures the living deeper into the cemetery, each lost soul adding its light to its glow. Those who followed it were never seen again, or so the legend said. I told myself I was here to document, to prove these stories true or false. I stepped forward, camera rolling, unable to resist its eerie pull. The lantern seemed to drift from one grave to the next, always just out of reach. Its glow flickered in and out of the fog, painting the tombstones in ghostly, trembling light. I followed cautiously, feeling a tug in my chest, a mixture of curiosity and dread. The fog grew thicker as I moved deeper, winding through rows of graves that seemed to stretch endlessly, bending unnaturally around me. My boots sank slightly into the damp soil, the squelch loud in the absolute stillness. Each step I took felt heavier, as if the cemetery itself resisted my presence. I caught the faintest sound, then a whisper. I froze, straining to hear. Another whisper followed, then another, layered, overlapping, impossible to separate. They murmured my name, soft, urgent, almost pleading. Goosebumps rose along my arms as a shiver crawled up my spine. The lantern flickered closer, and I felt a subtle warmth emanating from it, though the air was frigid. My instincts screamed to turn and run, but I found myself drawn toward the light, hypnotized by its strange rhythm, each flicker a heartbeat, hauling me forward. The ground became uneven, graves protruding at sharp angles, their stones jagged and slick with moss. I stumbled over a root, scraping my hand across the damp earth, and felt a cold sensation run through my fingers, as though invisible hands had grasped me. I yelped, pulling back, but the touch lingered a chill that pressed against my skin and seeped into my bones. I looked around, but the fog was too thick. The lantern floated steadily ahead, swaying, beckoning, impossible to reach. I noticed then that the graves around me were not ordinary. Some had names long eroded by time, others had no markings at all, just crude mounds of earth. The whispers grew louder, forming words I almost understood, calls for help, warnings, cries of despair. They brushed against my ears, and my neck, cold and soft as though the air itself had become a hand. I could feel them pressing against my chest, pulling at my limbs. Panic surged, and I stumbled, dropping my camera. The lantern flickered, paused, and continued forward, always just ahead, never slowing. I scrambled to retrieve my camera, shaking, but the moment I touched it, I felt the ground shift beneath me. Roots twisted, gravestones seemed to lean closer, and the fog thickened to the point where I could barely see my hands. The whispers intensified, overlapping in an almost deafening crescendo. My mind screamed at me to leave, to escape, but my body refused to obey fully, trapped in some invisible current, pulling me toward the lantern. I followed it blindly, weaving between mounds and broken headstones, until I realized I was no longer on a path I recognized. Hollow Grove had become a labyrinth. Every grave looked the same, yet different shapes bending slightly, shadows twisting, the earth soft and untrustworthy beneath my feet. And then I saw them, figures faintly outlined in the fog, standing among the gravestones, featureless, watching. They didn't move at first, but I could feel their gaze. Each seemed tethered to the lantern, their outlines flickering with its glow, adding their essence to its spectral light. I tried to turn back, but the fog shifted, turning the way I had come into a wall of mist. The lantern drifted closer again, and now I could hear faint sighs, the rustle of clothing long decayed, the drag of feet through wet soil. I stumbled forward, desperate, my hands clutching the camera for comfort, though it did nothing to ground me. The figures moved slightly when I approached, leaning forward as if studying me. Their presence was heavy, pressing on my chest, making it difficult to breathe. A sudden gust of cold air slammed into my face, and I fell to my knees, gasping. The lantern hovered above the ground now, its pale glow illuminating a grave with no markings at all. I could see the faintest traces of what looked like footprints, impossible, shifting, vanishing, and reappearing with every blink. Then the whispering changed. The words were clearer, urgent, desperate. Stay, join us, stay, join us. My blood ran cold. I realized that the lantern wasn't just leading me. It was trying to claim me, to pull me into the same fate as the lost souls tethered to it. I crawled backward, trying to escape, but the fog pressed in, thick and suffocating. Shadows twisted and reached, coiling around my ankles, tugging at me. The lantern flickered in response, pulsing like a heartbeat, and I felt something brush my hair, cold and soft, fingers of mist that sought purchase. I screamed, scrambling to my feet, but the cemetery had transformed completely. Graves shifted, twisted, their angles impossible. The lantern drifted ahead, glowing steadily, beckoning with a hypnotic rhythm I could not resist. I tried to run, my legs burning, heart hammering, but each step forward felt slower, weighted. My vision blurred, and the whispers became a cacophony, voices of the dead layered atop one another, crying, pleading, warning. I could feel fingers grazing my skin, tugging at my sleeves, brushing against my cheeks. The lantern pulsed brighter, and I realized with dawning horror that each ghostly touch strengthened its glow, feeding it, drawing it alive. I tripped again, landing hard on the wet ground. The lantern hovered inches away from me now, light spilling over my face. I could feel its heat, yet the air remained icy. I tried to scream, but no sound came. My arm shook as I reached for it, and for a moment, I thought I could touch it. The fog swirled violently, pulling at my clothes, tangling my hair, pressing my body toward the lantern. I realized then that it wasn't just light, it was a doorway, a conduit feeding on the living to swell its glow. I struggled, panic overtaking all reason. My camera lay in the mud, half buried and I abandoned it, sprinting blindly in the opposite direction. But the fog shifted, paths twisting, gravestones warping, until I could no longer tell direction. The whispers rose again, pleading, insistent, a chorus of lost souls tethered to the lantern. Their cold, invisible hands pressed against my skin, tugging, pulling, dragging me back toward the spectral light. Then, impossibly, I broke through the fog into a small clearing. The moonlight spilled across broken graves and twisted oaks. The lantern floated before me, motionless, but I could feel it every vibration. Every pulse of its light resonated through my chest. I stumbled, falling to my knees, sweat and cold mingling on my skin. I could hear it now, clear as a voice, though no mouth moved. Stay with us. Join us. I tried to run again, but my legs refused to obey. The cemetery had claimed my body. I awoke outside the gate hours later, dawn creeping over the hills. My clothes were wet with dew, hands scraped and bruised, camera missing. The fog had vanished, and the cemetery looked ordinary, peaceful, and empty. No lantern, no whispers, nothing. And yet, I knew the truth. I could still feel their presence, lingering at the edge of my mind. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I catch a glimpse of a faint light flickering in the distance, and I know they are waiting, watching, hoping someone will follow again. I have not returned, and I never will. The lantern of forgotten souls does not simply illuminate, it calls, it entices, it devours. And each time its glow appears in my dreams, I feel its pull stronger, as though the lost souls it contains remember me, whispering my name, reminding me that once seen, one is never truly free. I need to tell you this before I lose my nerve. They say if you hear the coffin scream at Oak Hollow Cemetery, you never really leave that place. I used to laugh when I heard the story. Now I don't laugh at all, because I heard it. And I don't think I ever truly escaped. My name is Daniel Morris. I'm 37 years old, a freelance journalist who makes a modest living chasing strange folklore in forgotten towns. It isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and feeds my morbid curiosity. Last fall, I drove to a small, worn-down town in Pennsylvania to research abandoned landmarks for a series one was writing. That's where I first heard about the screaming coffin. It came from a man in a diner, his hands trembling as he sipped his coffee. He leaned closer, lowering his voice until it was barely above a whisper. "Stay away from the far corner of Oak Hollow," he told me. "There's a coffin there. Old, cracked, half sunk into the ground. If you hear it scream, don't stick around, don't even look. Because if you do, you'll wake up in that cemetery with hours missing, not remembering how you got there." He laughed nervously afterward, like he'd said too much. But the look in his eyes wasn't joking. And for me, it was bait too good to resist. The next night, I packed my recorder, my camera, and a heavy flashlight, then drove out to Oak Hollow. The cemetery gates were iron, rusted, and they groaned like something alive when I pushed them open. Midnight air clung damp to my skin. The smell of wet soil and rotting leaves filled my lungs. Cicadas buzzed in the distance, but as I stepped deeper, the sound thinned, as if the whole place was holding its breath. It wasn't hard to find the neglected section. Grass grew waist-high, tombstones leaned crooked or had crumbled to nothing, and the earth was soft beneath my boots, like it didn't want to support the weight of the living. And there it was, the coffin. It wasn't buried, not fully. The ground around it had collapsed, leaving half the wooden box jutting up into the night. Its boards were black with rot, split down the middle. Resin, or maybe dried pitch, oozed along the cracks, but the smell wasn't sap. It was sharp and metallic, like old blood. I raised my camera, and that's when it started. The night went silent, completely. The cicadas cut off mid-chirp, the wind froze, Even my breath felt muted in my chest. Then I heard it. At first, a muffled moan, like something straining beneath the earth. The sound grew, cracked, and split into a scream. I've never heard a sound like it. It was human, but wrong, too raw, too full of rage and agony. It didn't echo in the air. It burrowed into me, rattled inside my skull, and clamped down on my ribs. My knees buckled. My flashlight flickered and died. The scream dragged on, shredding itself into jagged shrieks. My throat tightened, bile rising. I stumbled back, but my boots sank deeper into the mud, like the ground wanted to hold me there. My eyes locked on the coffin. The wood flexed, bending from inside out. Something clawed at the boards, long splintering scratches I could almost feel beneath my own fingernails. Then, just for a second, blood welled from the cracks. Thick, black-red droplets ran down the side and spattered into the dirt. My breath caught, and before I could tear my gaze away, the screaming stopped. Silence, and then a whisper. It came from directly behind me, low and ragged, close enough that I felt the warmth of it on my ear. You heard it. I spun so fast I nearly tripped, swinging my dead flashlight like a weapon. Nothing, just rows of crooked stones, shadows bending in the moonlight. My heart thundered. My legs finally freed themselves, and I forced them to move, to run. But each step felt heavier, slower, like the air had thickened around me. The last thing I remember clearly is the coffin. My eyes dragged back to it one final time. Its lid shifted, just slightly, enough that a gap opened, blacker than any night sky, and from that darkness, two hollow eyes blinked open. Then nothing. When I woke, I was lying flat on the damp ground. The sky was pale gray, dawn just breaking. My watch reads 6:12 a.m. My flashlight was shattered beside me. My recorder was gone. My camera, too. The mud beneath my nails told me I'd clawed at the earth during the night, but I had no memory of it. I stumbled home, but the nightmare didn't stay behind in Oak Hollow. The first night, I dreamed I was inside a box. Wooden walls pressed against my face. I tried to scream, but dirt filled my mouth. When I woke, my throat was raw, my sheets damp with sweat. The second night, the dream was worse. The scream wasn't coming from outside anymore. It came from my own lungs. By the third night, the dreams bled into waking life. I'd sit at my desk during the day and hear faint cries distant at first, then closer, like someone screaming into the walls of my apartment. I turned up the TV, wore headphones, blasted music, but nothing drowned it out. That's when the bruises started. Faint finger-shaped marks around my wrists, as if someone had grabbed me during the night. Dark smudges appeared on my chest, ribs aching when I breathed, and mud, always mud. On my shoes, my jeans, sometimes under my fingernails when I hadn't left the apartment all day. One morning, I found something worse. A shard of rotten wood lying on my kitchen table, splintered, cracked, and sticky with that same black resin. I swear it hadn't been there when I went to bed. I threw it in the trash. The next day, it was back this time on my pillow. I dug into the town's records, desperate for answers. That coffin belonged to Elias Crane, a murderer executed over 100 years ago. Legend said he buried his victims alive, ignoring their screams as he shoveled dirt over their faces. When he was finally caught and hanged, the town refused to bury him in consecrated ground. They stuck his coffin in that forgotten corner. But every time they tried to cover it, the earth pushed it back up, as if rejecting him. As if even the ground couldn't hold his soul down. Knowing the story didn't help. The screams only grew louder. By the 30th night, I couldn't tell if I was asleep or awake anymore. I found myself standing in Oak Hollow again, the cold air burning my skin, my hand pressed against that coffin lid. My fingers bled as the wood splintered beneath my touch. The lid groaned and lifted. Darkness yawned inside. 2 empty eyes stared back at me. The scream that followed wasn't from the coffin. It was from me. I think I ran. I think I tried. But I know, deep down, I didn't get away. Because every morning I wake now, I don't know where I've been during the night. Hours vanish. My memories dissolve. And always I hear it. That endless scream clawing through my bones. I'm telling you this as a warning. If you ever find yourself near Ocala, if you ever hear that sound, don't listen. Don't look. Don't let it in. Because once you've heard the coffin scream, it never stops. And one day, you'll wake up inside it. They told me never to follow the sound of laughter in St. Mary's Cemetery. Not because children were ever there, but because none of them should be. My name is Daniel Reeves. I'm 34, a night security guard by trade. I've worked plenty of shifts at empty factories, rail yards, and even a hospital basement. But when the city offered me a temporary job, watching the cemetery grounds after reports of vandalism, I took it. It was easy money, I thought. The dead can't hurt you. At least, that's what I believed. St. Mary's sits on the outskirts of town, bordered by a rusted iron fence and sprawling oak trees whose branches hang low like skeletal arms. The cemetery itself is old, some stones eroded beyond reading, others freshly carved. But in the far northern corner, beyond the older mausoleums and crumbling paths, is a section people avoid. Small mounds of earth, rows of tiny headstones, some so old the names are worn smooth. They call it the Children's Corner. That's where the tragedies lie. The diphtheria outbreak of 1911, the drowning of 3 siblings in the nearby river, the fire that claimed half a schoolhouse. Entire rows of children, buried far from the main plots, as though even in death they were separated. Locals whisper that they never rest. On my first night, nothing seemed strange. I walked the grounds with a flashlight, the beam cutting through mist that pooled in the grass. The smell was damp, a mix of earth, mildew, and decaying leaves. My boots crunched over gravel paths. The occasional owl hooted from the woods. It felt calm, if not lonely. I carried a thermos of coffee, my radio, and a sidearm not for ghosts, but for the living troublemakers who might wander in. It wasn't until close to midnight that I heard it. Soft, high-pitched giggles carried through the fog. My blood ran cold before I even processed it. The sound was unmistakable children laughing, light and playful. But it was past midnight in a cemetery where no child belonged. I froze, gripping my flashlight tighter, straining to listen. The giggles echoed faintly, like they were drifting through walls that weren't there. Then came the sound of tiny footsteps pattering across the grass, fast and darting, circling me. My light swept in quick arcs, revealing only rows of gravestones and shifting fog. No movement. No children. I told myself it was just sound traveling strangely, the way fog can play tricks on the ears. But unease sank into me like cold water. My pulse hammered as I forced myself toward the children's corner, telling myself I needed to check it to rule out the possibility of trespassers. The deeper I walked, the colder the air grew until I could see my breath hanging in front of me. My skin prickled, the fine hairs on my arms standing on end. The silence between the giggles was worse than the sound itself because it was loaded with expectation, like something was waiting for me to step closer. The corner was exactly as described, small rounded mounds lined in uneven rows, white stone markers no taller than my knees. Some bore carvings of lambs, others cherubs, others just names and dates that ended far too soon. My flashlight beam skimmed across them, catching dampness that shimmered like tears. That's when I noticed the soil. The earth atop several graves wasn't packed down. It looked disturbed, freshly turned, though no burial had taken place here in decades. I crouched closer, heart thudding in my ears, when a child's voice, clear and close, whispered, "Play with us." I spun, light flashing wildly across the rows, and for a fraction of a second, I swear, I saw a small figure dart behind a stone. Too small to be an adult, too quick to be my imagination. The laughter swelled again, overlapping voices, dozens of them now, surrounding me, rising in pitch until it felt like they pressed against my skull. The temperature plunged. My breath came in shallow clouds, my hands stiff with the cold. Then came the touch. Light, almost delicate, like a small hand brushing against mine. I recoiled instinctively, heart slamming, stumbling backward into a headstone. My flashlight clattered to the ground, rolling until the beam caught movement. Tiny footprints pressed into the damp earth, appearing one after another, circling the graves, circling me. The impressions were fresh, sinking as though small bodies were running invisible around me. I grabbed the flashlight with shaking hands, sweeping it frantically. For a moment, the beam caught something, a child's face, pale and hollow-eyed, peering from behind a stone. The moment I registered it, it vanished, melting into the fog. My rational mind screamed explanations, hallucination, exhaustion, imagination, but my body knew better. My skin burned with icy pressure. My stomach knotted in dread. These weren't tricks of light. Something was here with me. The giggles shifted. They weren't playful anymore. They were sharper, mocking, layered with tones too mature for children, as though something older borrowed their voices. My radio crackled violently at my hip, static bursting through, and underneath the static I heard words, my name. "Daniel," whispered in overlapping childish voices, drawn out, echoing as though spoken into my skull. My legs nearly gave way. They knew me. I tried to back away, stumbling toward the main path, when the footsteps followed, many of them, pattering in unison, rushing ahead, cutting me off. My beam swept across the ground to reveal dozens of footprints in the damp soil, leading not away from me, but toward me, stopping only a foot from where I stood. My vision blurred with panic. I stumbled again, and the thermos slipped from my hand, spilling hot coffee that steamed briefly before going cold in the unnatural chill. A shadow darted past me, then another, short and quick. Laughter erupted to my left, then to my right, then behind me, a ring of unseen children drawing closer. I turned in circles, chest heaving, and then I felt it again, small hands, dozens of them, brushing at my coat, tugging lightly at my sleeves, clammy and cold as grave soil. My scream caught in my throat. They were touching me, surrounding me, pulling me subtly toward the mounds. I don't know where the strength came from, but I bolted, shoving through the oppressive fog, sprinting for the gates. The giggles rose behind me, echoing, chasing, as though a horde of unseen children were on my heels. I didn't look back. I couldn't. My lungs burned, legs aching, but I didn't stop until I burst through the cemetery gate and collapsed on the gravel road outside. The night air was warmer beyond the fence, though my skin still crawled with phantom touches. The laughter faded slowly, swallowed by distance, until there was only silence and my ragged breathing. I never returned for the second shift. I told the supervisor I quit. No explanation, no hesitation. But the truth didn't stay buried. Since that night, I've heard faint laughter at the edges of sleep, high-pitched and distant, like children playing just beyond my door. Sometimes I wake to find small muddy footprints on my apartment floor, though I live on the third story with no children nearby. I know now what the locals meant when they warned me. The restless children of St. Mary's don't just want company. They choose it. And once they've touched you, once they've laughed your name into the night, you're never truly alone again. I should have turned back the moment I crossed the cemetery gate, but curiosity has always been my weakness. My name is Daniel Moore. I'm 31, and I work as a freelance investigator of local legends and paranormal phenomena. I had heard about Hillcrest Cemetery's tombstone voices from an old groundskeeper decades ago. Whispered warnings carried on the wind. Some stones speak at midnight. Listen, and they will speak your name. Speak back, and they'll know your secrets. I laughed then. I don't laugh anymore. I arrived shortly before midnight, the sky a deep indigo bleeding into black, fog curling around the leaning tombstones like smoke. The cemetery was silent, too silent. Not even the rustle of leaves disturbed the air. I stepped carefully along the uneven path, my boots sinking slightly in the damp soil, the smell of wet moss and decaying leaves pressing into my nose. My flashlight cut through the fog in thin, wavering beams. I could feel the cold pressing into my lungs, the wind biting at my cheeks, and a tingle ran down my spine, the kind that warns of something unseen. The locals had warned that certain stones emitted whisper-soft, unintelligible murmurs at first, growing louder as the clock struck midnight. They claimed the voices revealed the deepest fears or the darkest secrets of anyone who lingered too long. I had come to document it, to capture it on camera, and finally prove that the phenomenon was real. I hadn't expected to feel my heart thudding with such rapidity before even hearing a sound. At exactly 12, I noticed a flicker of movement in the fog, shadows stretching unnaturally across the gravestones. And then it began a faint, sibilant whisper, almost like the wind passing through dry reeds. I paused, straining to hear. The whispers grew, layered over one another in a language I couldn't understand yet somehow felt in my chest. They seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the air itself, vibrating against my skin. My pulse quickened. Something about the sound made my stomach churn, a premonition that these were no ordinary voices. As I moved closer to the older section of the cemetery, where stones leaned and cracked under the weight of decades, I heard my name. Clear, intimate, spoken in a tone that was almost a caress, almost a threat. Daniel. I froze, blood running cold. I whispered back, half in fear, half in disbelief. Who's there? The voices responded almost immediately, overlapping now with urgency and malice. We know. Then fragments of memories I had never shared aloud flitted through my mind, names, places, and secrets I had buried. I stumbled backward, shivering violently. I could see shadows shifting among the stones. Some moved like smoke, others as if the stones themselves bent toward me. The ground felt uneven beneath my feet, patches of moss slippery, roots twisting underfoot. Every step I took seemed to echo unnaturally, as though the voices were laughing at my attempt to flee. Cold brushes of air swept across my neck and arms, like invisible fingers tracing the lines of my bones. My flashlight flickered, casting the gravestones in grotesque, elongated shapes, each one a silent observer. I tried to focus on the camera, shaking, hoping to document the whispers, but the viewfinder only showed static and wavering light. Every attempt to steady it was met with a subtle tug at my clothes, a chill that ran through my limbs as if the cemetery itself were resisting my presence. The whispers intensified. I could hear syllables I didn't understand, yet somehow they conveyed warnings. You should leave, stay, leave. Stay, each repetition layered over the last until it became a distorted, hypnotic chant. The most disturbing moment came when a particular tombstone, a tall, cracked marble marker, seemed to vibrate as the whispers coalesced into a singular voice. It spoke clearly, though its origin was impossible. We see you, Daniel. We know your sins. My breath caught in my throat. I realized the whispers weren't random. They were personal, targeted. I staggered, gripping the nearest stone for support, and the cold seemed to seep through my gloves, into my bones, pressing down on my chest. I tried to retreat toward the gate, but the path twisted unnaturally, each familiar landmark distorted, replaced by new, impossible angles. The fog thickened, pressing into my eyes, wrapping around my head, like a suffocating shroud. The whispers multiplied, speaking my secrets, fears, and regrets aloud, laughing, crying, mocking. I could hear my own voice echoed in the wind, repeating words I had never spoken to anyone, confessions I thought were buried forever. A cold touch grazed my hand then, sudden and precise, as if someone or something had reached through the fog to touch me. I jerked back violently, but the sensation lingered, cold and wet, like condensation or more sinister intent. The shadows among the tombstones coalesced into darker shapes, reaching toward me. I realized then that the voices weren't just speaking, they were watching, learning, shaping reality around me to draw me deeper into their trap. I stumbled, falling against a moss-covered stone. The whispers rose to a crescendo, now unmistakably coherent, taunting, demanding, "Stay with us. Speak your truths. Join us." My mind reeled. I tried to speak, to call out in denial, but my own words seemed swallowed by the fog, re-emerging distorted, twisted, echoing back at me. I scrambled to my feet, heart hammering, panic coursing through every vein. Every gravestone around me seemed to bend and shift, forming narrow passages and dead ends. The voices began to chant in unison, a haunting harmony of every language I had never learned, layering together in incomprehensible terror. My head spun. I could feel the presence of countless unseen hands brushing against my body, gentle yet insistent, pressing me toward the heart of the cemetery, where the oldest stones lay clustered like a forgotten altar. My skin crawled, goosebumps raising every hair, as though the air itself had become sentient, alive with malevolence. I reached a clearing, the oldest section of Hillcrest. Moonlight spilled weakly through the fog, illuminating cracked and crumbling stones. Here the whispers were loudest, piercing my mind. Names, places, secrets, regrets, sins. Every shame I had ever buried surfaced in an unbearable cacophony. The cold intensified, pressing on me, suffocating, yet I could not move. The voices began to speak in tandem, my own name repeated rhythmically, "Daniel, Daniel, Daniel." I staggered, clutching my head, trying to block out the relentless torrent of personal confessions. Then, something I can only describe as presence manifested. The air thickened, coalescing into a shadowy figure among the stones, humanoid but distorted, limbs too long, edges blurred. It hovered, silent except for the whispers, which now seemed to radiate from it directly. The figure moved toward me, stretching, shifting, the fog swirling unnaturally around it. My legs refused to obey, nailed to the spot by terror. The whispers now spoke with intent, instructing me, demanding, "Join us. Speak your truths. Never leave." I fell backward, scrambling to the edge of the clearing, trying to escape. The gravestones seemed to close in, corridors of stone shifting as I ran. I could feel my breath freezing in my chest, my body trembling uncontrollably. Each step echoed unnaturally, the sound rebounding, distorted, until I couldn't tell if it was my movement or the voices mocking me. I stumbled over roots in uneven soil, the fog thick, my fingers dragging against damp moss as I tried to find the exit. The whispers changed tone then, softening, coaxing, intimate. "Daniel, it's easier if you speak." And I realized, with a terror deeper than fear, that the cemetery wanted my confessions, my truths, my soul. Every secret I had tried to bury, every misdeed I had hidden, they knew, and they demanded acknowledgement. My mind reeled, and the shadows seemed to close around me, pressing, shaping the fog into forms I could not escape. I remember screaming, though no sound seemed to reach the outside. I ran blindly, the voices in my head repeating everything I had ever done, every thought I had tried to suppress. Then, abruptly, I tripped over uneven ground, sprawling forward into soft, damp soil. I could feel them then, fingers, unseen but real, brushing against my skin, tugging, pulling. And in that moment, I understood. I could not leave. The cemetery would not let me. The whispers had ensnared me, woven into my mind, and now as part of their endless chorus. Hours, or was it minutes? Later, I awoke outside the gate. Fog had lifted, the moon had vanished behind clouds, and the cemetery seemed perfectly ordinary, silent, still. My clothes were torn, damp, and my camera had recorded only static. No evidence, no voices, no shadowy figure. Yet I knew what I had experienced was real. I could feel the whispers lingering at the edge of my consciousness, faint but insistent, calling me back, reminding me of my secrets, my name, my sins. Even now, in the safety of my apartment, I hear them sometimes soft, urgent, in languages I do not know. I catch fragments of my own confessions in their tones, whispered aloud by invisible mouths. Hillcrest Cemetery has claimed a piece of me, and I fear one day the pull will grow stronger, and I will find myself wandering between the stones again, listening to my name echoing in the dead of night. The tombstones speak. They know you. They see everything, and if you listen too closely, they will know your deepest truths. I should have never set foot near Hollow Creek Cemetery after sunset. My name is Emma Calloway. I'm 26, and I work as a freelance investigative journalist for a small paranormal blog. I chase legends most people dismiss, thinking the worst I'd encounter was cold feet or a broken flashlight. But Hollow Creek is different. Even as I drove along the fog-choked road that leads to it, my instincts screamed warnings I couldn't ignore. Every local I asked before arriving had leaned close, whispering the same chilling words. If you hear hooves at night, don't look back. He's seeking what was taken from him. I thought they were exaggerating. I was wrong. The cemetery sprawls across the base of a small hill, ancient oaks pressing their skeletal branches over crooked gravestones. The moon fought through the mist, casting dim, silver light that made the fog shimmer like a living curtain. I parked at the edge of the overgrown path, camera in hand, notebook tucked under my arm. The air was damp, heavy, smelling faintly of earth and decay, and as soon as I stepped from the car, a cold draft wrapped around me like fingers. It wasn't natural, it clung, persistent, and the hair on my arms prickled instantly. I moved slowly, recording every step. The legend I was chasing claimed that on foggy nights, a headless rider appears among the graves, galloping between stones with his horse, trampling over unmarked mounds. He is said to be the vengeful spirit of a man decapitated decades ago, hunting the soul of his murderer. The story alone was enough to send a chill down my spine, but I wanted to see it for myself. I wanted footage. Foolish ambition, I'd soon realize, had a cost. At first, the cemetery was unnervingly quiet. No rustle of leaves, no owl calls, nothing but the soft squelch of my boots in the damp soil. I reached an old section where tombstones leaned at impossible angles, some barely holding their place in the earth. Fog thickened as I stepped forward, curling around my ankles, seeping through my boots. Then I heard it, a faint thump, like a hoof hitting dirt. I froze. My heart thumped in response. "Hello?" I called, trying to sound steady. My voice sounded tinny in the fog, swallowed immediately by silence. Then thump, thump, thump. The sound was steady, deliberate, coming from the far side of the clearing. I swung my flashlight toward it, the beam slicing through the mist, but I saw nothing. Only gravestones, gnarled roots, and fog that seemed to move of its own volition. The thumping grew louder, and a dreadful awareness gripped me. This wasn't wind. It wasn't a stray animal. I could feel the vibrations through the soles of my shoes, through my chest. A percussive heartbeat that didn't belong to me. The locals had warned me. He seeks what was stolen from him. The legend said that even witnessing him could draw his attention. And now, standing in that fog-choked clearing, I knew I had. I tried to retreat, but the path seemed to dissolve behind me. Each step I took forward only pushed me deeper into the mist, deeper into the graveyard's unnatural labyrinth. Then, out of the gray haze, I saw him, or rather, the space where his head should have been. A horse loomed in the fog first, massive and black, its hooves thudding against soil and unmarked graves. And atop it, nothing. Just a collar of stiff, tattered cloth where a neck should have been, shoulders hunched as if weighed by centuries of rage. I froze, every instinct screaming at me to run. My voice caught in my throat. The horse moved slowly at first, each stump sinking into the earth with an unnatural depth, a sound that reverberated like a drumbeat in my chest. Then, closer, faster. The figure on its back moved with uncanny precision, weaving between gravestones as if the earth itself bent to its will. The fog seemed to react, swirling violently around the rider, stretching and curling like living smoke. Shadows of graves distorted, reaching toward me as if attempting to warn me or perhaps trap me. I felt a sudden gust of wind against my face, cold and biting, carrying with it the scent of iron and rot. It was him, the headless rider, and he was coming for me. I turned to run, tripping over roots and debris, flashlights swinging wildly. The sound of hooves multiplied, echoing from every direction, faster and faster, circling me. My lungs burned, but no matter how fast I ran, the sound followed, closing in, relentless. Panic clawed at my mind as my foot struck a gravestone, sending me sprawling into damp leaves. My flashlight skittered across the ground, revealing the rider for a moment, a massive silhouette outlined by moonlight, faceless, impossible. I could see his empty collar and shoulders, hunched with purpose. He raised a spectral arm toward me. The fog thickened, swallowing my flashlight's beam. I could hear whispers now, low, urgent, like 1,000 voices crying from beneath the ground. Run, stay, run, stay. My heart threatened to burst. I scrambled, gripping the dirt, feeling it cold and sticky under my fingernails. Then the galloping stopped. Silence fell, unnatural and suffocating. My ears rang. My chest ached. I dared a glance over my shoulder. Nothing, just fog, stillness, and gravestones leaning like mourners watching me. Relief surged short-lived. A shadow detached itself from the mist. The horse's eyes glowed faintly red, like embers smoldering beneath wet ash. Its hooves rose and fell without sound now, floating rather than stomping, and atop it, the headless rider turned slightly toward me. A sudden gust of air slammed into my face, icy and sharp, and I stumbled backward. I could feel the weight of his gaze, or what passed for it. An absence where his head should be seen to stretch toward me, empty yet aware, penetrating. The ground beneath me felt soft, almost liquid, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might sink into it. I turned and ran blindly, branches slapping my arms and face, gravestones looming like specters in the fog. But something had changed. The cemetery no longer felt like earth and stone. The graves shifted beneath my feet, the paths bent impossibly, turning me in circles. Each breath came in ragged gasps. My throat burned. My stomach lurched. Then I heard the galloping. Again, closer, faster. The horse's hooves seemed to strike every surface at once, echoing in my mind. And through the fog, I glimpsed figures rising from the unmarked graves, twisted, shadowy forms, silent witnesses to the rider's vengeance. I couldn't see faces, only shapes and movement, stretching and shrinking like smoke caught in the wind. They pressed closer, but I could not stop. I had to keep moving. I stumbled into an open clearing. Moonlight struck the mist in silvery beams. And there he was. Closer now, impossibly close, the horse rearing slightly, hooves scraping the air, the tattered cloth around his shoulders fluttering like a flag of death. I could feel the vibration of the hooves in my bones. The empty collar tilted toward me, and though there was no face, I felt it rage, sorrow, a relentless purpose. I fell to my knees, hands clawing at the dirt, trying to anchor myself, to disappear. A cold wind whipped through the clearing, carrying the smell of iron and wet soil, and I could swear the rider's horse snorted, exhaling visible mist like smoke from a forge. The whispers rose again, overlapping with the pounding of hooves. My vision blurred at the edges, time fractured. One moment I was on the earth, the next floating or falling through fog and shadow. The galloping closed in, each step a drumbeat of inevitability. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. Silence. Absolute. My chest heaved, my ears rang. I dared to lift my head. The fog thinned slightly, the moon casting pale light across the twisted gravestones. The headless rider was gone. No horse, no tattered cloth, no spectral presence. Only the graveyard, still and silent, as though he had never existed. I stumbled toward my car, camera dangling from my shoulder, recording nothing but static in the areas I had pointed it. My body shook uncontrollably. The air had returned to its normal chill, and I convinced myself, foolishly, that I had imagined it all. But I know the truth. I felt him. I felt the press of his absence, the intent in the void where his head should have been. Hollow Creek Cemetery has a memory, and I am now a part of it. Even now, weeks later, I hear hooves in my apartment at night, soft, distant, yet distinct. Sometimes I catch a scent of iron in the air. Shadows seem longer, angles sharper, and I cannot shake the feeling that he is searching still, moving closer, waiting for the moment when the living wander too close to the places where he rides. I tell this story because I cannot stay silent. If you ever hear the sound of hooves in the fog, if you glimpse a dark horse moving unnaturally across moonlit graves, heed this warning. Do not look back. Do not linger. Hollow Creek is not just a cemetery, it is a hunting ground. And the headless rider will not rest until he finds what he seeks. I should have never driven down that gravel road past the old oak gate. My name is Lucas Reed. I'm 29, and I'm a freelance urban explorer and content creator. I chase abandoned places and ghost stories for my channel, always looking for the next chilling tale to capture on camera. But what I found at Hollow Pine Cemetery that night was nothing I could have prepared for. I can still feel it, the way the air seemed to thicken the second I stepped out of my car, heavy with a metallic tang, like blood mixed with wet leaves. I should have listened to the warnings. Locals whispered about the phantom groundskeeper who roamed the cemetery after midnight, raking leaves that supposedly turned red under the moonlight. They said disturbing his eternal watch would curse you to wander forever. I laughed it off. I never laugh anymore. I arrived just as the moon emerged from behind rolling clouds, casting a cold, pale light over the gravestones. The cemetery had been abandoned for decades, save for the occasional caretaker decades ago, or so the record suggested. The path into the grounds was narrow and overgrown, with thick roots snaking across it like sleeping serpents. Each step I took made a sickly crunch beneath my boots, and the smell of damp earth and decay filled my nose. I tightened my jacket against the chill, trying to convince myself I was here for work, not curiosity, even as the fog began to curl around my ankles. I'd been told to stick to the main path, but something drew me deeper, toward the oldest part of the cemetery, where moss-covered gravestones leaned at impossible angles, and iron fences twisted like frozen screams. That's when I first heard it, the scraping sound of a rake dragging across stone and dirt. I froze, the sound reverberating in the still air, loud and deliberate, echoing like a heartbeat. It wasn't coming from anywhere I could see. I called out, half in bravado, half in fear. "Hello? Anyone here?" Nothing. I moved toward the sound, camera rolling, heart hammering in my chest. The scrape continued, slow and rhythmic. Then faint footsteps echoed behind me. Not mine, not matching my pace. I spun around, flashlight slicing through the fog, but there was nothing. No one. Just fog, twisted stones, and the creeping dread that filled my chest with icy fingers. The locals weren't exaggerating. Something was here. Something watching, waiting. I followed the noise to a small clearing where the moonlight pooled like liquid silver. That's when I saw him oar it. A figure in a tattered uniform, a color faded to gray, gliding across the cemetery with a rake in his hands. He wasn't walking. He hovered just above the ground, the rake scraping leaves that seemed to darken as it passed over them. Veins of deep red appearing in the dirt and foliage. The smell hit me then, a sickly, coppery stench of blood, wet and rotting. My stomach twisted, bile rising. I took a step back, but the figure turned. I swear, his eyes are the empty sockets where eyes should have been met mine. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. His presence pressed into me, cold as the grave itself, suffocating. I tried to move, to run, but my legs felt anchored to the earth. The rake scraped again, closer now, and I realized the leaves around me were darkening, curling as if burned by some unseen fire. I could hear faint whispers, murmuring my name, brushing against the back of my neck like invisible hands. I forced myself forward, trying to act rational, recording every step, every detail. "This is for the channel," I muttered to myself, though my voice trembled. I moved toward the figure, each step harder than the last, fog thickening around my legs, seeping into my boots, cold and wet. The scraping stopped suddenly, and silence fell like a stone dropped into water. Then came the whispers, louder, overlapping, speaking in a language I didn't understand but felt in my bones. The figure lifted the rake, pointing it at me, though I saw no hand, only the spectral outline of the ghostly groundskeeper. The temperature dropped sharply, and I could see my breath billowing out in panicked clods. Something brushed my shoulder soft, insistent, but not human, and I yelped, spinning to see nothing there. The rake began moving again, slowly, deliberately toward me, and the air hummed, vibrating with a deep, resonant energy that pressed my chest flat. I stumbled backward, tripping over a twisted root, and the ground beneath me seemed to shift. Shadows stretched unnaturally from the gravestones, curling around the figure like smoke, obeying a windless breeze. The whispering rose to a cacophony of voices layered atop one another, all calling my name, some crying, some laughing in distorted echoes. I realized with bone-deep terror that the locals' stories were true. Disturbing the groundskeeper's watch did not just summon him, it drew the dead around him, tethered to his eternal task. I crawled to my feet, trying to escape, and noticed the gravestones weren't where I remembered them. Paths I had walked moments before now looped impossibly, leading me back toward the clearing. It was as if the cemetery itself had become a maze alive, twisting, reshaping itself to trap me. I screamed into the night, voice swallowed by the fog, and the figure glided closer, rake scraping the ground, leaving dark streaks across the soil that pulsed like open wounds. Desperation gave me courage or madness. I lunged forward, camera swinging, trying to keep the figure in sight. But every step I took seemed to reset the distance, no matter how fast I ran. Leaves rustled under invisible feet, scraping behind me, whispering my name, circling me, pressing me to the center of the clearing. And then I realized I could hear more than footsteps. I could hear breathing. Slow, labored, coming from all directions, yet no one was visible. I stumbled to the base of an ancient oak, its bark slick with dew and cold. The figure floated toward me, rake raised. Shadows pooled at the edge of the clearing, darkness curling into shapes that defied natural angles. And then, closer, I could see him clearly, The spectral groundskeeper, face gray and hollow, mouth opening slightly in a silent hiss, eyes like pits of emptiness. The rake stopped mere inches from me, and I felt a pressure on my chest, as if invisible hands had clenched around my ribcage, squeezing the air out of my lungs. My vision blurred at the edges, the fog thickening into solid shapes, and the whispers turned into screams, unbearable, searing into my ears. I screamed back, thrashing, trying to break the invisible grip, and suddenly I was falling. Or rising. I couldn't tell. The world twisted. Gravestones stretched, some turning inward, some outward, like the earth itself was bending. And then the rake touched me. Not physically, but through the air, through the essence of me. My blood ran cold, my limbs heavy, and a voice not the groundskeeper's, but a chorus of thousands of lost souls rose in my mind, chanting, "Stay, stay." I remember blinking and finding myself at the cemetery entrance, fog receding like it had never existed, air normal, cold but breathable. The gravel crunch under my feet was mundane. The night was silent, ordinary, as though nothing had happened. My camera, lying in the dirt, had recorded only static, no figure, no rake, no leaves, only silence. But I knew it had followed me. I can feel it in quiet moments, when the wind shifts just right, when shadows seem to linger a heartbeat too long. Sometimes I wake in the night, hear the faint scrape of a rake against stone, and smell the metallic tongue of blood in the air. I've never returned to Hollow Pine Cemetery, and I never will. I speak of this now because if you hear the whisper of rakes against leaves on a moonless night, if you feel unseen eyes watching as you wander, know this: the phantom groundskeeper still works his eternal watch, and those who wander in his cemetery after midnight may never find their way out. I still remember the first warning. It wasn't the local gossip or the faded "Do Not Enter" sign near the old Black Hollow Cemetery. It was the chill that sank into my bones the moment I parked my car on the cracked gravel road leading to it. I'm Adrian Cole, 28, a freelance journalist chasing stories of the macabre for a small YouTube channel I run. I cover haunted places, the kind people whisper about but rarely dare to visit. Black Hollow had been on my radar for months. Its reputation as the resting place of the Weeping Widow was infamous in these parts. But nothing prepared me for what waited beyond the rusted iron gates that evening. The sky had dimmed to a bruised purple, clouds gathering like a shroud over the low hills. Fog clung to the ground in thick, creeping tendrils, curling around the graves like skeletal fingers. I stepped out of my car, camera slung over my shoulder, notebook in hand, and immediately felt it. The air was too still. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, and the usual chorus of crickets and distant owls had gone silent. My footsteps crunched against the frost-hardened dirt as I made my way down the narrow path lined with crooked gravestones, some leaning like they were about to topple, others cracked and weathered with names long forgotten. Local legend said the widow appears to mourn her husband, murdered decades ago, but that she does not merely weep. They say she lures the living into the shadows, and some never return. At first, I had scoffed at the story as nothing more than folklore, a good hook for a chilling segment, but a part of me couldn't shake the unease tightening my chest as I approached the oldest section of the cemetery, where the oldest graves rested beneath twisted oaks. The sun had long since vanished behind the clouds, leaving only the dim glow of my flashlight cutting through the gloom. And then I saw her. She was seated on the edge of a moss-covered tombstone, draped in black from head to toe. Her face was hidden beneath a veil, and yet I felt her gaze before I even realized she had looked at me. The hair on my arms prickled, and a cold draft seemed to rise from the ground itself, brushing against my legs and fingers. I wanted to move closer, to get a better shot for my camera, but every instinct screamed for me to stop. Still, curiosity, the journalist's curse, pushed me forward. "Excuse me," I called, my voice cracking. "Are you all right?" She did not answer. She continued to weep, slow, mournful sobs that echoed across the graves like a dirge. But it wasn't the sound alone, it carried a weight, a cold despair that seeped into my lungs and made each breath difficult. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine, and the hair on my neck stood on end, as if invisible hands were brushing against it. The air tasted metallic, like rust mixed with the tang of damp soil. I reached for my camera, hoping to record something tangible, something real. That's when the unease escalated. The light from my flashlight flickered, then dimmed, leaving me with only the weak halo around the widow. And then I noticed it. The shadows around her weren't right. They stretched longer than they should, twisting and curling like living things. One reached out toward me, and I stumbled back, heart hammering. The weeping grew louder, a hollow, echoing cry that seemed to come from inside my own skull. I tried to rationalize it: wind, fog, exhaustion, but when I looked again, her head lifted ever so slightly. I caught the glint of eyes beneath the veil, hollow, black voids that seemed to see into me, not at me. My stomach turned over. I realized then that the stories were not exaggeration. They weren't myths to scare children. She was real, and she was aware of me. I tried to retreat, but the path I had walked seemed to have vanished. The graves around me had shifted. I recognized the oak trees and the crumbling tombstones, but the familiar markers of the cemetery were gone. Fog pressed close to my legs, cold and wet, sticking to my skin like clammy hands. A whisper slid through the mist, almost inaudible, like the rustle of silk. "Come," it said, soft but insistent. My heart nearly stopped. I told myself it was the wind, that my mind was playing tricks, but then the whisper came again, clearer, closer. "Stay with me." Panic surged, and I ran, stumbling over roots and gravestones, but every step seemed to bring me back to her. She rose then, the sound of her mourning cut abruptly, replaced by a low, sorrowful hum that vibrated through my chest. The veil shifted, revealing pale, almost translucent skin, and I could swear I saw tears of blood running down her cheeks. My legs burned, but I couldn't stop, couldn't escape the sense of being drawn to her, to the stone she perched upon like some ancient throne of grief. I tripped and fell, and the world tilted. My flashlight skittered across the dirt, illuminating her fully for the first time. She floated above the tombstone, not walking, not stepping, but hovering as if the ground itself refused her weight. The fog swirled around her, thick and blackened at the edges. And then she reached for me. I felt a coldness that wasn't just the night air. It was her, moving into my skin, crawling along my spine. My teeth chattered, my throat dry as dust. Every instinct screamed to flee, but my feet felt rooted in the earth, my mind both paralyzed and screaming. She began to move closer, the sobs resuming, low and undulating, now mixing with whispers of countless voices layered underneath men, women, children, all mourning, all trapped. I realized with a shuddering clarity that these were the souls she had claimed. I could hear their tiny, desperate cries blending with hers, echoing through the hollow air. And in that instant, I understood what the townspeople had meant. Some never return. I crawled backward, dragging myself across the cold ground, desperate for any path out, and that's when I saw it. Footprints. Not mine, but others deep. Ragged impressions in the soil that led nowhere, and then vanished beneath the fog as if swallowed by the earth. I recognized the shapes. I had read accounts in old newspapers, reports of people disappearing near Black Hollow. Now I was part of that pattern. The realization clawed at me, suffocating. Escape wasn't just difficult, it might be impossible. Desperation gave me strength, and I bolted upright, sprinting blindly through the cemetery, branches whipping my face, mossy stones tearing at my hands and knees. I didn't dare look back, but every so often I felt her presence an icy draft, a shadow passing too quickly, a whispered cry that curled around my ears and threatened to drive me mad. The fog seemed to pulse, thickening in waves, and I began to lose all sense of direction. Time didn't exist anymore. The sky remained bruised, and the moon, obscured by clouds, offered no guidance. Then I stumbled into a small clearing, moonlight breaking faintly through the trees. I froze. She was there, at the center, standing on a grave far older than any I had seen. The veil lifted fully now, revealing a face that was both beautiful and horrifying, eyes dark wells of infinite sorrow, lips cracked, skin almost glowing with an unnatural pallor. She tilted her head and smiled, and it wasn't a comforting expression. It was hunger, patience, a dreadful expectation. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. Her voice was layered with dozens of other voices, each adding weight to the command. My legs shook. My breath came in ragged gasps. "But now that you are..." She stepped closer, and the earth seemed to part beneath her, the ground around her feet dissolving into black mist. "Stay!" I screamed, trying to break the trance, trying to force my body to run, but the world blurred. My vision swirled, and suddenly I was no longer sure if I was standing or sinking, falling or walking. Shadows reached from the corners of the cemetery, twining around me, tugging, pulling, whispering our name in my ears. "Adrian, Adrian." Then, as quickly as it began, the sensation lifted. I found myself outside the cemetery gates, my camera fallen in the dirt, fog receding like it had never been there. My heart pounded so violently, I thought it might burst. The silence returned, normal this time, almost cruelly calm. I ran to my car without looking back, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. I drove home that night in a daze, every reflection in the rear-view mirror making me flinch, imagining her pale eyes staring back at me. When I finally reached my apartment, I checked the footage on my camera. There was nothing. No weeping widow, no mist, no floating figure. Only static, and the faint sound of whispering, almost imperceptible, layered beneath the hum of the camera. Since that night, I haven't returned to Black Hollow. I haven't spoken to anyone about it. How could I? They would think I had lost my mind. Yet I know the truth. She exists. She waits. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear I hear the faintest echo of her cries in my own apartment, the cold despair brushing my skin, reminding me that escape is never final. I tell this story now because I cannot remain silent. And if you ever hear whispers calling your name in the still of the cemetery, take heed. Some grief does not rest. Some widows never weep alone. And some shadows, once glimpsed, may follow you forever. I should have never taken that path alone. My name is Evelyn Carter. I'm 28, and I document haunted locations for a small online series. People warned me about St. Alden's Cemetery, whispered stories of a pale, faceless specter that hovers over the newly buried, watching. Some said if you met its gaze, its shadow clings to you for life. I thought it was just a tale, something to thrill the gullible. I was wrong. I arrived just as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the gravestones. The cemetery was quiet, unnervingly so. Even the wind seemed hesitant, barely rustling the leaves. I stepped cautiously across the damp earth, the smell of moss and wet soil thick in my nostrils, carrying with it a metallic tang I couldn't place. My flashlight sliced through the gathering fog, illuminating crooked headstones and moss-covered statues. The air was already cold, a creeping chill that pressed against my skin and sank into my chest. The stories said the specter only appears near recent graves, hovering silently, faceless, pale as ash. I had come to see if the legend had any truth, to capture proof for my series. But as I walked deeper into the cemetery, I felt eyes on me. Not in the ordinary sense, the weight of unseen observation, icy and oppressive, that pressed against my skin and raised goosebumps across my arms. Every step I took felt heavier, as though the earth itself resisted me. I stopped beside a small cluster of fresh graves, markers still damp from the recent burials. That's when I saw a figure standing among the stones, its shape humanoid but impossibly thin, draped in mist, its face smooth and blank. My breath caught. I wanted to step back, but my feet felt rooted. The air grew colder, my fingers numb, my chest tight with sudden panic. The specter didn't move toward me. It didn't need to. Its presence alone made the night feel suffocating, the silence vibrating with a dreadful expectation. I raised my camera slowly, trying to capture the figure, but every time I blinked, it seemed to shift, closer and closer to one of the graves. I could feel it watching me, though it had no eyes. I remembered the warning, do not make eye contact. But how do you avoid eye contact with a face that isn't there? My hands shook violently as I kept the camera pointed, heart hammering in my chest, the beam of light trembling. A faint whisper, almost imperceptible, brushed against my ear. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Warning. I spun slightly, and my flashlight flickered, casting the figure in sharp relief against the fog. My skin crawled. I felt a cold brush along my arm, not wind, not moisture, but something impossibly frigid, like a hand sliding across bare skin. I gasped and stumbled back, and the figure seemed to tilt its head, not in curiosity, but in deliberate acknowledgement. The ground around the new graves seemed to darken, the damp soil turning an unnatural shade, as if it absorbed light. Every breath I drew came shallow, ragged, and each exhale fogged in the frigid air. My camera's screen flickered, distorted images of the figure jumping in and out of focus. And then I heard it, a low, hollow vibration, a voice-like sound emanating from the specter itself. It was a tone I could feel in my bones, a soundless resonance that pressed on my skull, insistent and oppressive. I tried to speak, to tell it I meant no harm, but my voice faltered, swallowed by the thick, oppressive air. I stepped backward, feeling the ground beneath me uneven, almost moving, as though the cemetery itself was shifting subtly, trapping me in its labyrinth. Every shadow seemed alive, stretching toward me, converging in the fog. I knew, with a rising horror, that I had stepped into something beyond comprehension. The specter drifted closer, its faceless head tilted toward me. I could feel its icy presence, pressing against my skin, seeping into my pores. It radiated an unnatural cold that made my teeth chatter and my joints ache. My mind raced stories of others who had encountered it, flashed before my eyes. Pale hands, sudden deaths, madness, shadows that clung to the living. I felt the beginnings of a panic that was more than fear. It was instinct, primal and undeniable, screaming at me to run. I stumbled backward, tripping over a raised root, falling hard against the moist earth. The specter didn't pursue in the conventional sense. Its faceless gaze, or rather its blank surface, seemed to draw me in, bending the fog, warping the space around it. I could feel its intent, though it did not speak. It wanted me to see it, to acknowledge its presence. And every second I resisted, the pressure on my mind grew heavier, the air thick with icy malevolence. I scrambled to my feet, my flashlight slipping from my grasp, beam bouncing off headstones, illuminating the figure in jagged flashes. I could see that it hovered above the ground slightly, no feet touching the earth, shifting subtly like smoke over fire. Its presence distorted the air around it. The fog clung tighter to its form, curling unnaturally. I wanted to run, but I could barely move. My legs refused to obey fully, as though bound by some unseen force. A sudden, unbearable chill pressed against my back, and I realized the specter was closer than I thought. My stomach lurched, nausea rising, and I felt a pressure on my chest that made breathing difficult. I tried to avert my gaze entirely, ducking behind a gravestone, but the faceless figure moved with unnatural speed, already in my line of sight. I felt my knees buckle as the realization hit me. Once you meet its gaze, the shadow follows you. Always, until death. I turned away instinctively, racing blindly toward what I thought was the exit. The fog shifted, the paths distorted, and every step felt as though I were sinking deeper into a trap. The specter glided behind me, silent, faceless, relentless. Every now and then, I caught glimpses of it in the corner of my eye, and each time, my heart skipped in terror. The icy presence brushed against me, not with hands, but with pure chill, a weight pressing down, a premonition of doom. I stumbled out of the cemetery as the first light of dawn streaked the sky. The gate seemed impossibly far, the walk back longer than memory allowed. I collapsed outside, trembling, chest heaving, and the fog began to lift slowly. The cemetery appeared normal again, silent, empty, almost serene. But I knew better. I could feel it. Even from a distance, the specter's shadow clung to me, coiled around my consciousness, an unyielding presence that would never release its hold. Days later, I realized the true horror. Shadows in my apartment lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward walls and corners. I would catch glimpses of it in reflections, faceless and pale, lurking behind my eyes in mirrors. Sleep was filled with dreams of the cemetery, of graves freshly turned, and the same icy presence pressing down on me. Friends noticed my distant stares, my unease, my fear, but I could not explain it. I could not tell anyone. Every mirror, every reflection, every shadow small, flickering, or massive reminded me of the warning. The shadow never leaves. I avoid cemeteries now, avoid dark spaces, avoid solitude at night. But it does not matter. The specter of St. Alden Cemetery is with me, invisible yet ever present. Its weight presses against my mind, my spine, my very soul. I have learned to live with it, but the truth is chilling. It will not relent, and someday it will claim me completely. I warn anyone who hears this story. Do not enter St. Alden Cemetery alone at night. Do not gaze toward the fresh graves. Do not look, because once you meet the graveyard specter's face, even faceless, it finds you, and its shadow follows, unseen, unstoppable, a constant reminder that death's watch is never over.